The silence in that conference room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Patricia Sullivan, our vice president, slammed her palm on the glass table so hard I thought it might crack. All 120 employees sat there frozen under those harsh fluorescent lights. Even the usual keyboard tappers and pen clickers went dead quiet. You could hear every breath in that room. "Stand up right now and apologize to my son for your incompetence or clean out your desk," Patricia announced, her voice echoing off the walls of our company's main hall. Her son Jason, hired 6 months ago and mysteriously promoted to senior manager last week, sat beside the executive team with this smug little smirk on his face. My heart was pounding as every single eye turned to me. I'm Hunter Morrison, 48 years old, and I've been working my tail off in financial analysis for 18 years. After my military service in financial operations, I got my CPA and thought I understood how this business world worked. Until that moment, I believed merit and hard work meant something. I slowly stood up from my chair, the metal legs scraping against the floor in that dead silence. The walk to the front felt like it took forever, each step echoing like a countdown timer on my career. Patricia's smile got wider, like she was already tasting my humiliation. She thought she had me trapped. She figured I'd crumble under the weight of public shame rather than lose the job I'd held for nearly 2 decades. She never really knew me at all. I connected my personal device to the display system. The projector hummed to life. "I believe this will clarify the situation," I said, my voice quiet but clear. Patricia's smile vanished when I didn't immediately launch into an apology. Instead, I tapped the screen. Jason's voice filled the room. "Mom, I totally screwed up the Hartwell presentation. I mixed up their financial projections with our internal numbers. But don't worry, I told everyone it was all Hunter's fault." Then Patricia's unmistakable voice. "Perfect, sweetheart. Keep blaming him for everything. Once this merger goes through, we'll restructure the entire department anyway. Just hold tight until our bonus clears." Shocked gasps rippled through the room. Patricia lunged toward me, her heels clicking on the carpet. "That's private. Turn that off immediately," she shouted, reaching for my device. Garrett Williams, our CEO, held up his hand. "Continue," he said, his expression hardening like concrete. I nodded and played the next recording. "Just delete his slides before the investor meeting," Patricia instructed. "Say there was a technical issue. We need the board to see only your version of the proposal." "But what if someone asks questions I can't answer?" Jason whined. "Then you look at him and say, perhaps Hunter can explain why his data didn't support this conclusion. Make him look unprepared." With each new recording, Patricia's face lost more color. Jason sank lower in his seat, no longer smirking, just staring at his trembling hands. The room stayed absolutely still as I disconnected my device and returned to my seat. Patricia stood frozen at the front, her mouth opening and closing without sound. But I knew this was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. Let me tell you how this entire nightmare started. Until 6 months ago, I was the go-to guy in our financial analysis department at Pinnacle Financial Solutions here in Denver. I'd spent 18 years building my reputation through careful work and solid strategies. My colleagues respected me. Upper management consulted me on major decisions. Clients specifically requested me for their projects. Over the years, I'd mentored 14 junior analysts, helped them understand not just the numbers but the stories those numbers told. I had my CPA, military background in financial operations, and a network of industry contacts I'd built relationship by relationship. These weren't just professional connections. They were handshake deal friendships built on golf courses and over client dinners. In our industry, reputation was everything. At 48, I'd reached that sweet spot where experience meets expertise. My mortgage was manageable, my kids were planning for college, and I was looking forward to building my legacy in this company. I figured I had another 15 good years before retirement, maybe moving up to department head or even CFO eventually. Then Patricia hired her son. I remember Jason's first day like it was yesterday. He wore a designer suit that probably cost more than my car payment, and introduced himself by announcing he'd graduated from some elite East Coast university with honors. The kid had confidence, I'll give him that. Later, through casual conversation with HR, I found out he'd barely passed and had been on academic probation twice. But hey, everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves, right? "Hunter, you'll be mentoring Jason," Patricia announced during a department meeting 3 days after he started. "Show him everything you know. I want him to understand our processes from the ground up." I noticed several colleagues exchanging glances across the table. Everyone understood what mentoring the boss's son really meant, babysitting an entitled kid while maintaining my full workload. At 48, with 18 years of experience and a track record of successful projects, I was now expected to hold the hand of someone who could have been my son. That afternoon, Jason sat beside my desk, scrolling through his phone while I explained our financial analysis processes. I showed him our proprietary models, walked him through risk assessment frameworks, and explained how we balanced conservative projections with growth opportunities. "This is so boring," he sighed after 10 minutes. "Can't you just give me the summary? I need to understand the big picture, not get bogged down in details." "Understanding the methodology is important," I explained patiently. "Otherwise, you won't be able to defend your analysis when clients ask tough questions. Otherwise what? My mom runs this department. I don't need to understand every little detail. That should have been my first real warning sign." But I still believed in the system back then. I thought hard work and competence would win out eventually. I figured if I could just show Jason the ropes properly, he'd develop some respect for the process and maybe even contribute something valuable. What a fool I was. See, in my 18 years at Pinnacle, I'd seen plenty of entitled new hires. Kids fresh out of college who thought they knew everything, executives' relatives who expected special treatment, even a few genuine nepotism cases. But most of them eventually learned to respect the work, or at least kept their attitudes in check. Jason was different. He had this combination of arrogance and complete lack of curiosity that I'd never encountered before. The first project I assigned Jason was straightforward: compile customer financial data for our quarterly review. Nothing fancy, just gathering numbers we already had and organizing them according to our standard template. I gave him clear instructions, a step-by-step guide, and my direct extension if he had any questions. During that first week, I checked on him twice. Both times, he was scrolling through social media while our proprietary analysis software ran calculations in the background. When I asked how things were going, he'd give me this dismissive wave and say, yeah, it's all good. Just waiting for the computers to do their thing." I should have known right then that he wasn't actually learning anything. But I kept giving him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was a quick learner. Maybe he just processed information differently than I did. 3 days later, at the department review meeting, Jason presented something completely different than what I'd requested. The data was superficial, missing key metrics we always included, and several conclusions contradicted our previous quarterly findings. Worse, he'd somehow gotten access to preliminary figures that weren't supposed to be released yet, numbers that only Patricia's assistant typically handled. When Garrett asked about the discrepancies, Jason turned to me with these wide, innocent eyes. "Hunter told me to do it this way. I was just following his instructions exactly." I felt every person in that room turn to stare at me. "That's not correct," I said carefully, keeping my voice even. "The instructions I provided were—" "Are you calling my son a liar?" Patricia interrupted, her voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone that made everyone's skin crawl. The meeting continued with me trying to salvage the presentation while simultaneously defending my reputation. I explained the proper methodology, corrected the data interpretations, and answered Garrett's increasingly pointed questions about our department's quality control. By the end, I looked like either an incompetent supervisor or someone trying to throw a junior analyst under the bus. Afterward, Patricia pulled me into her office. The space always intimidated people. Corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver, expensive furniture, and walls covered with awards and photos of her shaking hands with industry big shots. "If you can't work effectively with Jason, perhaps we need to reevaluate your position here," she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "He's new and learning. You're supposedly experienced. Any failures in his work reflect more poorly on you than on him." "I understand your concern," I replied, "but the instructions I gave him were clear. I have the original email chain if you'd like to review it." She looked up then, and I saw something cold flash in her eyes. "Hunter, are you suggesting my son is lying about what you told him?" "I'm suggesting there may have been a miscommunication." "There was no miscommunication. Jason is very detail-oriented. If he misunderstood something, it's because you weren't clear enough." She leaned back in her chair. "I need team players here, not people who can't take responsibility for their mistakes." That was just the beginning. Over the next few months, a pattern emerged that I was too naive to recognize at first. Jason would take credit for my successful work while somehow managing to blame me for his failures. Reports I'd prepared over weekends would mysteriously appear altered by Monday morning, with key risk factors downplayed and optimistic projections that made no sense given market conditions. Client emails I'd sent would be intercepted and modified before reaching their destinations. I'd send a carefully worded assessment highlighting potential concerns, only to discover later that clients had received a completely different message, one that dismissed those same concerns as overly conservative and not reflective of current market dynamics. My performance reviews, which had been stellar for 18 years, suddenly started including phrases like resistance to change, difficulty collaborating with junior staff, and tendency toward outdated analytical methods. Colleagues who had sought my advice for years began avoiding me in the hallways. The network of professional relationships I'd spent nearly 2 decades building was slowly being poisoned. At home, my wife Sarah noticed the change immediately. "You're bringing work stress home again," she said one evening after I'd snapped at our teenage daughter over something trivial. "What's going on at the office?" "Just some personality conflicts with the new hire," I told her. At 48, with our mortgage payments and the kids thinking about college, starting over somewhere else wasn't really an option. "I'll figure it out." What I didn't tell Sarah was how deeply this was affecting my confidence. For 18 years, I'd been the guy people came to with tough questions. I'd built financial models that helped secure millions in funding. I'd spotted risks that saved the company from bad investments. Suddenly, I was being treated like I didn't know what I was doing. The psychological warfare was subtle but effective. Patricia would schedule important meetings during times she knew I had client calls. Jason would accidentally leave me off email chains for projects I was supposedly supervising. Documents would disappear from shared folders, only to reappear with my access mysteriously revoked. But the truth was, I was drowning. Every project became a minefield. I'd complete analysis that I knew was solid, based on 18 years of experience and industry best practices, only to watch Jason present a watered-down version that ignored critical risk factors. When problems inevitably emerged later, guess who got blamed for not identifying them early enough? The most frustrating part was watching my colleagues' reactions. Some genuinely didn't know what was happening and started questioning my competence. Others clearly saw what was going on but chose to stay silent rather than risk their own positions. A few tried to offer subtle support, but nobody was willing to directly challenge Patricia or her son. The breaking point came during preparations for the Hartwell Industries merger, the biggest deal our company had pursued in a decade. This wasn't just another quarterly review or routine client assessment. This was the kind of deal that could define careers and set the company's direction for years. I spent 3 weeks analyzing Hartwell's financial structure, market position, and integration challenges. I built detailed models showing various scenarios, identified potential regulatory hurdles, and created a comprehensive risk assessment that highlighted both opportunities and concerns. It was some of my best work, thorough, nuanced, and honest. Jason contributed virtually nothing except complaints about the long hours and questions about when we'd be done. But somehow, 2 days before our presentation to the board of directors, he was listed as co-lead on the project. The night before the board presentation, I stayed late in the office, making final adjustments to our slides and double-checking all calculations. The building was nearly empty by 8 p.m., just security guards and a few other analysts working on urgent projects. That's when I heard voices coming from the break room down the hall. "Mom, I'm really worried about tomorrow. Hunter's analysis is incredibly detailed, and if the board starts asking technical questions about the integration timeline or regulatory approval process, I won't know how to answer." I stopped walking and moved closer to the partially open door. "Don't worry, sweetheart." Patricia's voice was unmistakable. "I've already spoken to Garrett about some concerns regarding Hunter's approach. I suggested you prepare an alternative presentation, something more focused on the opportunities rather than dwelling on every possible risk. But his data is solid. I checked everything twice. Data can be interpreted many ways, honey. We'll just frame his as unnecessarily alarmist and overly conservative. These board members want to hear about growth opportunities, not every tiny risk that might never materialize." Patricia's voice had that satisfied tone I'd heard her use when she thought she'd outmaneuvered someone. "Trust me, by this time next month, you'll be leading this entire department and Hunter will be looking for work somewhere else." I backed away from the break room door, my mind racing. Everything suddenly made perfect sense. The altered reports, the missing emails, the whisper campaign against me. This wasn't just workplace incompetence or generational differences. This was deliberate, systematic sabotage designed to destroy my career and clear the way for Jason's unearned promotion. That night, I sat in my home office staring at 18 years' worth of performance reviews, client testimonials, and project successes. My military training had taught me something important. When you're under attack, you don't just defend. You gather intelligence and plan your counteroffensive. I made a decision that would change everything. I would document every interaction, save every version of my work, and build an unshakable case, not for revenge, but for survival. At 48, with a family depending on me, I couldn't afford to lose this battle. My military background in financial operations had included basic intelligence gathering techniques. Back in the service, we called it due diligence under fire, the ability to collect accurate information when people were actively trying to mislead you. I knew how to recover deleted files, analyze metadata, and create secure backups without leaving digital fingerprints. I started keeping my personal device nearby during meetings and conversations, recording when legally permissible in our jurisdiction. I began systematically saving original versions of all my work with digital timestamps before submitting anything. The process was methodical and exhausting. Every evening after work, I'd spend 2 hours going through email logs, comparing document versions, and creating detailed timelines of interactions. Sarah started bringing me coffee in the garage around 9 p.m., understanding without being told that something major was happening. The next morning's board presentation was even worse than I'd feared. Jason presented his alternative analysis, basically my work from 3 months earlier, but with all the risk factors minimized and profit projections inflated beyond any reasonable expectation. He stood there in his expensive suit, confidently presenting outdated information as cutting-edge insight. "I have some concerns about the analysis Hunter prepared," he told the board with practiced sincerity. "It seems unnecessarily pessimistic and could potentially derail this important merger opportunity. I've prepared what I believe is a more balanced assessment." I watched in silent fury as he clicked through slides that were almost identical to my previous work, except stripped of any meaningful risk analysis. The numbers looked great on paper, but they ignored current market conditions, regulatory changes, and integration challenges that could sink the entire deal. When the presentation ended, I waited for someone, anyone, to recognize my previous work or question the outdated assumptions. But either no one noticed or no one wanted to rock the boat with such an optimistic assessment. After the meeting, Garrett called me into his office. "Hunter, I have to say, I'm disappointed. Jason's analysis seemed much more aligned with our growth objectives. Your version seems overly focused on potential problems rather than opportunities." "Sir, the analysis he presented was based on market conditions from 3 months ago. The regulatory environment has shifted significantly since then, and—" "Are you suggesting you understand the market better than our senior manager?" Garrett interrupted, gesturing toward Jason's newly assigned title on the organization chart behind his desk. I stared at that chart for a moment. Senior manager. Jason had been with the company for less than 6 months and had contributed exactly nothing of value to any project. Meanwhile, I'd just watched him present my own work as his breakthrough insight. "No, sir," I finally managed. "I'll review my approach and try to be more forward-thinking." For the next 2 weeks, I became a man obsessed. Every evening after work, I'd sit in my garage with my laptop, methodically gathering evidence. I recovered original emails from server backups, compared document versions with their altered counterparts, and reached out to 3 former colleagues who'd left the company under mysterious circumstances over the past year. What I discovered was far worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about me, and it wasn't just about clearing the way for Jason. Patricia had been systematically pushing out anyone she perceived as a threat to her authority or her family's advancement. She'd built a network of control through a combination of favoritism, intimidation, and strategic character assassination. Rachel Martinez from IT security became an unexpected ally. We'd barely spoken in 5 years, but she approached me one evening in the parking garage. "Hunter, I need to show you something," she said. glancing around nervously. 3 months ago, Patricia requested what she called a security audit of all department communications. The official reason was protecting proprietary information, but look at the actual search parameters she requested. She showed me a list on her tablet. Hunter Morrison plus mistake, Hunter Morrison plus error, Hunter Morrison plus problem, Hunter Morrison plus disagree. The search had gone back 3 years, mining every email, document, and internal communication for anything that could be twisted against me. She's been building a case, Rachel explained. Not just against you, either. I've got similar searches for 6 other employees who've left over the past 2 years. People started calling it the Patricia pattern, targeted systematic harassment until people quit or got fired. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed more than just proof of harassment. I needed to catch them in the act, demonstrating their willingness to damage the company itself for personal gain. My opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 weeks before the crucial all-staff meeting, problems with the Hartwell merger began surfacing exactly as I'd predicted in my original analysis. The regulatory concerns I'd identified were materializing, market conditions were shifting unfavorably, and integration costs were ballooning beyond Jason's optimistic projections. Instead of acknowledging these problems and adjusting course, Patricia decided to find a scapegoat. Me. The Friday before the all-staff meeting, she cornered me in the elevator as I was leaving for the weekend. "Monday's meeting isn't going to be pleasant for you, Hunter," she said with a cold smile, "but I'm prepared to offer you a way out. If you publicly acknowledge that your analysis was flawed and that Jason's approach was superior, I might consider keeping you on in a reduced capacity." I looked directly into her eyes. "And if I don't? Then you can clean out your desk before you leave that day. Your choice." The elevator doors opened at the parking garage level, and she stepped out with complete confidence. Think about it over the weekend. At your age, starting over won't be easy. That weekend was the longest of my life. I sat in my home office staring at months of evidence spread across my desk like pieces of a massive puzzle. Sarah found me there Sunday evening, still in the same clothes I'd worn to church that morning. "You're scaring me, Hunter," she said quietly. "What's really going on?" I told her everything. The sabotage, the altered reports, the systematic campaign to destroy my reputation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to fight," I said. "But first, I need to make one phone call." Monday morning, I made the call that would change everything. Samantha Brooks had been our largest investor for years, though she rarely attended company functions. I'd worked directly with her on several major projects over the past 5 years, before Patricia took over the department. If anyone would listen to the truth, it would be her. "Hunter, is everything all right?" she asked when I reached her at 6 a.m. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "and I need to show you why before it's too late." We met at a quiet cafe 3 blocks from the office at 7 a.m. I arrived early, my laptop and carefully organized files spread across a corner booth. When Samantha walked in, she moved with the kind of focused purpose that made her one of the most successful investors in Denver. "You have 20 minutes before I need to be somewhere else," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Make them count." Opened my laptop and played the recordings. I showed her the original reports alongside their altered versions. I walked her through the systematic pattern of sabotage and the threatened careers of other employees. Samantha listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small leather notebook. When I finished, she closed her notebook and studied me for a moment. "Why come to me instead of going to HR or Garrett directly?" "Because HR reports to Patricia, and Garrett has been dismissing concerns about her for months. You have enough influence to actually do something about this. And you deserve to know if the company you've invested in is being run by people who manipulate financial data for personal gain." She nodded slowly. "What exactly do you want from me? Attend today's all-staff meeting, witness what happens, then decide if this is the kind of leadership you want managing your investment." Samantha checked her watch. "I'll make some calls. Be ready for anything." I arrived at the office 2 hours early, my stomach tight with nervous energy. As I walked through the lobby, I noticed unfamiliar faces in expensive suits having quiet conversations with Garrett in his glass-walled office. Their serious expressions and formal demeanor suggested this wasn't a routine business meeting. At 9 a.m., my desk phone rang. "Hunter," Garrett's voice was clipped and formal. "Please come to my office immediately." Every eye in the department tracked my movement as I crossed the floor. The speculation was written on their faces. Everyone expected today to be my last day at Pinnacle Financial Solutions. Garrett wasn't alone when I entered. 2 members of the board of directors sat at his conference table, along with a woman I didn't recognize. Samantha was nowhere to be seen. "Close the door," Garrett instructed. I complied, fighting to keep my breathing steady. "These are some very serious allegations you've made," he began, tapping a thick folder on his desk. "Patricia Sullivan has been with this company for 11 years. She's generated significant growth in her department and maintained strong client relationships." "Yes," I agreed, "by taking credit for other people's work and systematically eliminating anyone who might threaten her position or expose her methods." The unknown woman leaned forward. "I'm Amanda Foster from our legal department. We've reviewed the materials you provided to Ms. Brooks. While the recordings are concerning, documentation made without explicit consent can create legal complications." My heart sank. They were going to protect Patricia after all. "However," Amanda continued, "the pattern of document alterations and the testimonies from former employees present evidence of systematic fraud that cannot be ignored. The board has voted to proceed with a full investigation." One of the board members, a man I recognized but had never met, spoke up. "The all-staff meeting begins in 15 minutes. Patricia is expecting to publicly discipline you," after which she planned to announce Jason's promotion to department director. "And now?" I asked. "Now we want to see exactly how far they're willing to go," Garrett said. "You'll attend the meeting as planned. Let Patricia make her accusations. Respond however you see fit." And that's how we arrived at the moment I described at the beginning. Patricia demanding I apologize, me connecting my device to the projector, and those damning recordings playing for everyone to hear. But what I haven't told you yet is what happened after I played the last piece of evidence. "You'll never work in this industry again," Patricia shouted, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "Do you have any idea who my friends are? Who my husband plays golf with? You're finished in Denver." "That's quite enough," interrupted a calm voice from the back of the room. Every head turned as Samantha walked forward, accompanied by 2 people I recognized from the morning business news. Representatives from the state regulatory commission that oversaw financial services companies. "This was supposed to be an internal meeting," Patricia sputtered, her face pale. "I invited them," Garrett said coldly. "After receiving some very concerning information this morning about potential securities violations." Patricia's face went white as she realized the trap she'd walked into. She turned desperately to Jason, who looked equally panicked. "This is all a misunderstanding," Patricia insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "Those recordings are taken completely out of context. Hunter has been underperforming for months. Ask anyone in the department." "Actually," said a quiet voice from the 3rd row, "that's not true." Landon Hughes, a junior analyst I'd mentored 2 years earlier, stood up slowly. "Hunter trained me when I started here. Everything I know about proper financial analysis and ethical reporting came from him. But 6 weeks ago, Patricia specifically instructed me to rework Hunter's market assessment for the Hartwell deal, removing what she called excessive risk factors. When I told her I wasn't comfortable altering his analysis, I was suddenly removed from the project team." One by one, other colleagues stood up. Each had a story about pressure to alter data, instructions to exclude me from important meetings, or directives to report non-existent mistakes in my work. The carefully constructed narrative Patricia had built was crumbling in real time. "Jason, tell them the truth," Patricia said desperately. "Tell them how Hunter tried to undermine this merger." All eyes turned to Jason, who seemed to shrink in his chair. The confident young executive was gone, replaced by a scared kid who'd been caught red-handed. I just did what you told me to do, Mom," he whispered. The regulatory representative stepped forward. "Ms. Sullivan, we need to speak with you privately about these allegations, particularly regarding the financial projections that were presented to shareholders and investors." 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office, formerly Garrett's corner office, reviewing resumes for our expanded ethics compliance team. The Hartwell merger had proceeded, but on honest terms based on accurate analysis. Our stock price had taken a temporary hit when the scandal broke, but recovered strongly as investors responded to our new transparency initiatives. Patricia had been terminated and was facing both civil and criminal charges for securities fraud. Jason had resigned before he could be fired, though his name was permanently associated with the scandal. I'd heard through the industry grapevine that he was working at his uncle's small accounting firm in Nebraska. Most importantly, we'd implemented a comprehensive whistleblower protection program and established new oversight procedures. No one would ever again face the kind of systematic harassment I'd endured. As I looked out at the Denver skyline from my CFO office, I realized something important. This hadn't just been about revenge or even justice. It had been about standing up for the principle that competence and integrity should matter more than politics and nepotism. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be silent, regardless of who doesn't want to hear the truth. At 48, I'd learned that experience and patience can defeat arrogance and shortcuts every time. You just have to be willing to fight for what's right. If this story resonates with you, remember that your experience and integrity have value. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.